Welcome to the 13th episode of the Lebanese Physicians Podcast. And today we have two guests with us. One guest you've already seen before, and a new guest, Rayah Touma Sawaya, who's currently a fourth-year medical student at the American University of Beirut. I think she'll graduate probably very soon. And she did her pre-med at AUB. She did her biology degree over there and then ended up going into medical school afterwards. Throughout her medical school years, she has become interested mostly in humanities and medicine, and also mental health, public health, and advocacy. And she ended up writing a book with some of her mentors called Solace, A Legacy of Care, which we will discuss during this podcast. Welcome, Rayah, and welcome, Muhammad Ali, who everybody met, I think, during the last podcast that we did.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, of course, it's a pleasure for us to have you. So, Muhammad Ali, do you want to start by asking your first question?
Yeah, I just want to go way back a little bit before the book and ask you what prompted you to go into medicine in the first place.
So I'm going to start around in a bit of background. So in high school, when the question came, what do you want to do with your life? I really took it very seriously because I wanted to do something important and I felt my career was the way to do that. So I come from Dhur Shwir in Lebanon. So it's a town very known for its community service. And so I grew up in a place and in a family that emphasized giving back to the community and belonging and doing good things for your community. So that was my background growing up. And then in school, I was a good student. I didn't have difficulties with particular subjects, but I really enjoyed the sciences in particular. So I thought, how could I combine those interests together to do something that would benefit me and society? So I was like, okay, medicine looks like a really good idea. It's challenging enough, it's intellectually stimulating enough, and at the same time, it's a very humanitarian calling. So that's why I went for medicine.
Then after you went to medicine, looks like at some point in time, you were observing, I guess, the other students, your faculty, your mentors, and then decided that you need to write a book, right? So what,
yes.
So what inspired you to write this book?
So what actually happened was a series of events that later led to the book being written. So in my third year of bio, before graduating, I had already applied for med school and was waiting for my answer back. But I had a very unfortunate incident with my family. So my grandmother had to be hospitalized, and I was the one who figured it out and had to go with her for the ambulance. And we live in a place that's pretty far away from very big hospitals. So our first choice was a rural hospital, but it was needed because it was an emergency. So as we were going there, I realized, okay, I know medicine, I know it's intellectually stimulating, I know you can do good things, big things, but I never had experienced a crisis situation of the sort. So at that time, I handled it well. My mother came and the situation got resolved, thankfully. But the imprint of that particular situation, whether it was the healthcare sector or the financials of it or the emotional load of it in itself, it led me to write my first, not really story, but a reflection. So at AUB, we have something called Learning Communities course. And at that time, I had met my to-be mentor, Dr. Zakia Dimasi, whom I owe a lot of this to her, because she read this reflection actually, and she motivated me to write even more. And she pointed out my skill set in that sort of writing. And at that time, I thought that, okay, this was therapeutic. This was a cathartic process of expressing my emotions. And a lot of people did relate actually to those certain events. And as I learned more in medicine and I went through the journey of medical school, I realized that a lot of people had went through similar stories, whether patients or people from the healthcare system or caretakers of patients. And that inspired me to be, okay, how can I make this a touching process, but also a healing process? And then Dr. Zakia, she said, why don't you talk to Dr. Talia Arawi, who is the head of the Salim Al-Hus Bioethics and Professionalism program at the UBMC. And so I met with her, and she came up with the idea of, why don't you write a book, a series of short stories, and through two main characters who would be the medical students observing several different scenarios, and you highlight the importance of empathy and humanity in medicine. So that's how it all worked out.
Okay, so it seems that writing the process was therapeutic to you. And I guess this is where the name comes from. You found solace in writing the book.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
Okay, and I found solace in reading the book personally. So it goes both ways, I guess.
Yes. So that was the point as well, because I felt like, okay, you're not the only person who this has happened to. Of course, it's a very unfortunate incidents, and it's a hard incident to go through. But at the same time, a lot of people have passed through that, and you can find unity and the community in that, and then share the process together and slowly resolve it.
I guess so. I think I'm gonna guess. I mean, I read the book. It's pretty easy read, very easily flowing, and I liked a lot of the stories. But I'm gonna guess which one then is the real life story. I guess.
Yeah.
Because there was one story about a grandma that was brought into the hospital, right? Is that the story?
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah, and basically, I think it is a reflection of. I mean, I've worked in Lebanon, and I see it. It's a reflection uh, of the unfortunate reality over there, in terms of, you have to have your insurance, and then you have to have co-pays before any medical therapy is initiated on your loved one. So
Yeah, exactly. And we were fortunate enough, I guess, but we were. And I think to point out that privilege, that some people are fortunate enough and then they realize that it's very important, so that we can work on a healthier and better healthcare service that would be available for everyone going through a crisis, and not just the people who can pay for
can you tell us a bit about this story, like without going into details about which
it. Yes, for sure. So my grandmother, we live, as I mentioned, in Dhur Shwer, and that's a area in the mountains. So it all started when I was visiting her, just making sure that she was doing okay. And then everything happened. She started feeling bad, and she started becoming out of breath. So the funniest thing I remember, it's funny right now, but it wasn't funny at the moment, is that they had to carry her physically in a stretcher and then carry it down the stairs, because there was no way that we could get her out of the house and then into an ambulance without having two people carry the stretcher in itself. So and then on the way to the ambulance, it's emotionally frustrating, and you want to get there as fast as possible, but the roads are like really winding. They're like S-shaped roads, right and left. And that was very the process to getting there was very hard. And then finding out that they needed financially to clear her before doing anything, and that the intervention was needed as soon as possible, that hit hard a lot. So I was thinking that, okay, we have the solution, or at least part of the solution. Why not rush to do it instead of just waiting for those bureaucratic yeses and acceptances, and then figuring that out later? So, I was like maybe naive enough to think that I'm a genuine person, my family are genuine, and that they would pay for this. Just please help as soon as possible. So these things made me realize later on what are the important parts of the healthcare system that need to be addressed.
It was an emergency situation at that point in
Yes.
time. It seems like it needed to be done independent of the security and status of the patient.
Yes.
So that was a really moving story, and thank you for sharing it. One of the stories that personally touched me was the patient with a skin condition and whom the medical student was able to help form an online support group. And it was very inspiring for me to read it. And I thought like a recurrent theme in many of the stories in the book was that through small acts of kindness, a medical student, even though they're not done with their training, can make a big impact. So I want to ask you what stories resonated the most with your readers.
So I think the psoriasis one was a pretty good one, which you mentioned. I'm glad you mentioned it because I have two of my close friends who already have the skin condition, and it's not very much talked about or addressed. But the way that this was dealt through the story, I wanted to make sure that it was an okay situation, because a lot of people look and stare at these lesions, let's call them, and they're not infectious, but people don't know that, and society can be pretty brutal in terms of judging them. And so throughout the story, I wanted to say that people can be okay with it. You can learn, you can raise awareness about this. People can learn that it's okay and it's fine, and you don't have to judge people that severely because you don't know what impact it has on their self-esteem and their mental health as well. And that medical students really do have a role in playing as maybe a mediator sometimes, or an observant, because we get to observe a lot of things maybe and not do them because we're still learning. But through the observation, you can notice many things that help you later on in your training and in addressing people's self-esteem and keeping them feeling okay when they're in your office.
Yeah, I think I think a lot of these stories show that they do show the humanitarian part of medicine. For example, I think that lady who was waiting in clinic and seemed very stressed out and was shouting at everyone, and then turns out she had her own conditions that she was dealing with. And that is why she was so stressed out. I think sometimes we judge people or we don't talk to them as well. But then once you get into it with them and talk to them more, you tend to learn more about them.
Yeah, exactly. And we tend to be very overwhelmed with our own words, which is very understandable, especially now considering everything going on. But, taking that extra step and putting in the effort of not being judgmental and having enough patience to say, okay, but what if this person is just acting like this because of a certain situation or a stress that they're feeling? This extra effort that is the empathy in itself is very important in medicine, but also to note that one should have the space and the time to be able to be that patient and give that effort. So we can't just expect people in healthcare to be okay. Yes, I will be patient with everyone, but at the same time, patients need to know that. So through the book, maybe it's very clear that understanding should be there on both sides and effort should be there on both sides. But just it was a reminder for everyone there to take a deep breath maybe, and just start again from the beginning, keeping into consideration that people are going through different things.
I think in your book, you take it a step further. So we've talked a lot about the importance of having an astute sense of observation, about conveying empathy, but you take it to the next step by being an advocate. So I guess I want to ask you is how can we create an environment for medical students to, one, show empathy, and two, be advocates for patients?
So I think this is a very important thing because empathy is a very hot topic at the moment, but I think it should be it should be on both sides. So it should be a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach. So students should want to be empathetic, students should want to put in the effort, but at the same time, they should be provided with the space to do that and with the skills So not all people are natural at this, but you can learn how to do this to an extent, and you need to have the environment to do that, have the support from the administration, from the hospital, and to create this sort of environment. So it has to be, I don't think it's a one-sided effort at all. It's a two-way street. And I'm hoping that the administration and the students would be able to bridge together when we talk more about this and raise more awareness about this.
Right. I mean, part of this is also a lot of talk about emotional intelligence. I think it's not only being bookworms, reading and being smart. It's more about being emotionally intelligent too, in terms of how to deal with people. I think that's probably the part that takes the most in a doctor. It's not like you being smart. It's more how you deal with the people around you, because you're dealing with people every day. So
yes. Exactly. And unfortunately, the assessments that we have as students, so as you go through pre-med and then medical school, you tend to have a lot of written assessment, oral assessment, as in skills and assignments, but you don't have a way to measure empathy or to measure emotional intelligence. We have the med school interview, which is getting better at this, and but still, I think we need to grow a lot more in that extent, and to emphasize the importance of these soft skills, and not just, memorizing as fast as possible or regurgitating information that doesn't really matter the next day or with your patient.
And I think your book, we were discussing this, your book was written before the current crises that hit Lebanon, including the COVID crisis, the economic crisis, the blast in August. How do you feel have these crises had a big impact on your friends, the medical students, the residents at the hospital?
Yes, of course. I don't think at any point in time I imagined graduating or passing through my clinical years with all these events going on. But in some way, it has given us an unfortunate but unique experience in ways we never imagined. And we stepped up. Like, I'm so proud of my fellow students and the residents at the hospitals and the attending. So I really see the effort that they're putting to show up and be there every day for their patients, despite everything going on, whether financially, politically, or emotionally. And at the same time, I know medically we're getting a different viewpoint of things, but I hope that this would make us even more driven towards tackling things like healthcare inequalities, financial issues in healthcare, and just being there for each other emotionally, because sometimes it's too much of a competitive area. And medicine is known, like pre-med and medicine is known to be a very competitive field. So the vulnerability it has brought out in us, and the way that we have supported each other is beautiful. I wish none of this had happened and we still got to support each other this way. But some things you cannot control, but we're controlling how we're reacting to it. Definitely we need the help and all the help and support that we can get, but I think we're doing a good job of surviving it so far.
I think you're doing more than surviving. And honestly, I remember when the Beirut blast hit, I was and the hospital went on code D alert, so disaster code, and everyone, all the students, even first-year medical students, residents from different specialties, everyone was able to help, and something was awakened. You were describing the process from going through pre-med and then medical school, and how it's demoralizing taking all those exams, and how it takes away the humanity in it.
Yes.
But in Arabic we say المصيبة بتجمع. So disaster unfortunately united us, and I thought that was something that happened this year in Lebanon. So I guess I want to ask you now your thoughts about wellness and the importance of humanities. Do you think humanities plays a role in the wellness of medical students?
I think that we've encountered many different events that showed how much humanity is important, and the humanities in itself. So not just the concept of humanities, but the arts and things that are not just solid sciences, how much they've helped in the in the grieving process first, and then to becoming a healing process. Because we've we've written poems, we've written pieces, we've drawn art. All these ways of expressing this much trauma is needed and should be encouraged, because we need to grieve this situation to be able to somewhat start healing from it. And I think that's very important to be emphasized and to be continued. So not just in the times of crisis, not just right now. We need to promote a culture where that sort of self-expression is important and is a standard of care, rather than just, an exception right now because of the circumstances.
Now that we've talked about this, I mean, I think so. So I think the student wellness thoughts that you're talking about is mostly keep writing about this, keep expressing it to each other, right? And,
Yes.
and that hopefully will be part of the healing process. For that, I'm actually impressed by how much people have moved forward after this. I think it did not take as much time as everybody thought. I mean, I think in the background, there's still going to be always things to remember from this, but people have, for the most part, been able to move forward and keep on with their lives despite everything that happened. So now the question about you. So what are your future plans now that you're graduating your fourth year of medical school finally?
So hopefully, hopefully and unfortunately, I think it's time for me to move. I had delayed that for a while, and I think that staying in Lebanon for medicine and at AUB was a good choice for me. I don't have any regrets, but I think it's time for me to explore more. I want to broaden my horizons, and hopefully, I'm very interested in mental health and public health. So hopefully I'll be completing a master's and aiming for residency in the US.
Are you going to keep writing? Are you going to keep writing more books? More books?
I hope so. I don't think right now is the good time to do it, because I think there's something in the writing process where, once you're just, it's a cathartic process, and once you're doing it constructively towards something. So right now, I don't think it's constructive yet. I think it's very a healing process still. So it's very raw material, but I'm hoping later on I would have the courage to do that, because it was already very vulnerable to write down my thoughts and get these snippets out of my head and then share them with the whole world to see and judge, which is, I think, something very hard to do. At least it was in my experience. So I think I'm going to need a bit of time to absorb and think about this. But I'm hoping I will continue to write, because I truly believe that it's a healing process for me, and that sharing it with other people, it just brings people together. And that's beautiful for me.
You're a very talented writer and a very eloquent speaker, and I would encourage you to continue writing, maybe even explore poetry if you have all that raw material. So, and express yourself through different means of creativity. I know there was a lot of art in the book. Do you want to talk about the art in the book?
Because yes. Yes, so the cover was done by my school best friend. I love the book because I'm gonna digress a bit, but I love the book in itself because the product was sort of my idea, but people who matter to me in my life pitched in a lot to help in the end product. So the cover actually is the work of my best friend from school. We've been best friends since we were tiny people. Her name is Tina, and she is an architect. And so I told her about my idea of the design, and then she took it and put it together all in all. And one of the first people I showed the finished book to for feedback is my other best friend from school. Her name is Ramallah, and she gave me a lot of feedback about particular stories. So and then it just went on. My best friend from med school my very close friends, Farida, Hina, they all started to give feedback and just encourage me to move with the process, because it was very hard to publish during these times. But still, they invested so much and they believed in me. And of course, Mimosa Arawi, she's the one who drew the illustration. And they were in themselves, if you look at them, you can explore the essence of each story. So there's an art to every story, and then you can see that through the art that is drawn, and it's absolutely beautiful.
Any closing remarks or advice for students moving forward?
I think what I would say, or at least I hope someone had said to me before, is that keep your support system close. None of this would have happened without my support system, my family, my sister. So medicine gets overwhelming a lot of times, and then you need your safe space and your zone to remind you of who you are and what you're doing, and because you get lost very easily. And that don't be afraid to go somewhere that is unknown, to get out of the box, to share that ideas that are not always conforming, because they do end up going somewhere, even if it's not a mainstream kind of thing, but you end up doing something beautiful regardless.
And I would encourage all pre-med students to read the book, especially before they start third-year medical school, which can be really tough, especially during those times, and finding their way through small acts of kindness, through creativity, through finding mentors. So I guess today we talked about different venues to have that kind of support for both healing and grieving and finding your way forward, definitely.
Thank you, Rayah and Muhammad Ali, for being on this podcast. I think I agree with you, Muhammad Ali. I think it's a great book. I read it. It was easy to read. I learned a lot from it, and I think Rayah did a great job writing it. I encourage everybody to read it. It's available on Amazon, right? It's available anywhere else.
Yes, it is available.
Amazon.
Yeah. Yes, on Amazon and Kindle, and hopefully in print soon in Lebanon.
You can buy it in multiple different ways, I guess.
Yes.
All right. Thanks to both of you. And it was great talking to both of you today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
It was great to be back again.